What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. It's Saturday, which means we're doing a fun hockey style tier list, and today I'm going to be ranking the past 15 NHL draft classes. Now, each of these draft classes has some amazing players, but some of them definitely stand out more than the rest. So the tiers that we're going to be using are as follows. The first one is the best. This is the draft class that I think stands above all of the rest within the past 15 years. The next tier is elite top 10 with good depth, meaning that there's some great players at the top, and there were also some good players taken in the later rounds. Third tier, great top 10 but with minimal depth, meaning that there might have been some good players at the top, maybe in the first round, but the more and more you went throughout the draft, the less and less talent there was. The fourth tier, great top 10 with no depth, meaning there was some good players at the top but really nothing in the later rounds at all. And then the last one, not a deep draft class, maybe there was one or two good players, but the rest of the draft was just basically a bust. So if you guys have been enjoying the content lately and you want to follow along with the channel some more and know when I post content like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button now, and let's get right into this one. All right, so before I even begin ranking these draft classes, there is one thing that I forgot to mention. I wanted to add an extra tier called too soon to judge. There's a few draft classes in the past couple of years that I feel like we can't really make a solid prediction on because, well, especially like this last year, we haven't even seen these players play in the league. And beginning with the 2024 NHL draft, I think that that's the perfect place for it to go. We'll put this one in too soon to judge. It has some great talent. Macklin Celebrini, of course, is one of those names, but we haven't seen them play in the NHL yet, so we can't make any sort of prediction. So rather than putting them in a random tier based on what we think they're going to be, I think this is the perfect category for them. Now, the 2023 NHL draft, I feel, is very similar as well. We have seen Connor Bedard play, Leo Carlsson, guys like Adam Fantilli, but they've only played in one season, and rookie years aren't really the exact best way to measure a person's talent. So I think that 2023 should go in this tier as well. And also 2022 is one that I'm debating putting in this too. I do feel like I can make a pretty solid prediction on the 2022 one, and right now I'm feeling like it's not a very deep draft class, but these are the three that I feel like I need to give a little bit more time to. We've seen players like Sevkovsky start to become solid forwards in the NHL, but the rest of the draft, well, it's not looking great, but we can't really make that assumption yet. So these are the three that I'm going to put in the too soon to judge tier, just because I feel like we need to give it just at least 5 years before we can make a judgment. And now I'm going to completely contradict that and rank 2021 back to 2010. Let's begin with the 2021 NHL draft. Now, this one to me is actually a pretty solid one now that we're seeing these players get a few years under their belt. We have Owen Powers, Matty Beniers, Mason McTavish, Luke Hughes, Kent Johnson, and many more that were taken in the first round that have already gotten their first entry-level deals. There's also a few nice players that were taken in the later rounds like Wyatt Johnston and Matthew Nyes, who have been given more opportunities over the past season or two, showing that they have some skill. So I think when we're talking about 2021, I think we could put it in the great top 10 with minimal depth. They have some really nice players at the top that should blossom into some great NHL franchise guys. Also with a few guys like Wyatt Johnston and Matthew Nyes, like I mentioned before, that give this draft a little bit of depth, but right now I haven't seen so many players coming from the bottom round, so I think this is a good tier to place it, and as they continue to develop, we can maybe make an adjustment for this one. Like I said, I debated putting this one in the too soon to judge tier, but I feel like we have to at least give it a little bit of a ranking. Next up, we got the 2020 NHL draft. This was the year that a lot of the stuff was remote along with the 2021 draft, so it was definitely a bit weird to watch, but if you just look at the top 10 in this draft, just solely the top 10, you can see that there's a lot of amazing players. First overall with Alexis Lafreniere, then Byfield, Stützle, Raymond, Sanderson, Drysdale, Holtz, Jack Quinn, Marco Rossi, Cole Perfetti, Seth Jarvis, and the list just keeps going with guys like Dawson Mercer, Connor Zary later down, and I think there's a couple other players that were taken in the later rounds, but I don't think that there was a lot of depth in 2020. So the way I see 2020 right now is that the top 10 picks were phenomenal. They had some great players here, and even the rest of the first round was pretty good overall. But just looking past the first round, I don't think that there was a lot of players that are really screaming out on paper right now. So I think 2020 belongs just a notch below 2021, just because I don't see any players that are really worth listing once you get past the first round, which is sort of a big deal when we're talking about ranking draft classes, because I feel like you need to have at least a few players that blossom that people didn't really expect. So I think 2020 is going to belong in the great top 10, maybe even great first round tier, but it didn't really have any depth once you got past that. Next up, we got the 2019 NHL draft. This one's a little bit different. I didn't think that you could maybe get worse than 2020, but I feel like once you get past the top 10, top 15 15 here, there really isn't all that much to write home about, but the top end talent in this draft is actually really good. Got guys like Jack Hughes, Kaapo Kakko's a bit of a bust right now, Kirby Dach, Bowen Byram, Alex Turcotte. You have Moritz Seider, Dylan Cousins, Trevor Zegras, Matt Boldy, Thomas Harley, just a lot of really good players. Even Cole Caulfield was in this draft too. But once you get past that first round and maybe even the first couple picks in the second round, there's not all that much to really be excited about here. I feel like it's pretty similar to 2021 because there are a few players in the second round that I'm a big fan of, like Shane Pinto. I like Bobby Brink, and obviously Kochetkov went to Carolina in this draft too. So there's a bunch of great players that you could potentially see blossoming in maybe the second round, but once you get past that, I feel like there really isn't any hidden gems. So I think it belongs in about the same tier as the 2021 NHL draft, where you can see there's a lot of upside with some of these guys, but in the end, it's not really all that exciting, so it doesn't really belong in that elite tier with the good depth. So that's a perfect spot in my eyes, placing it in the same tier as 2021. Next up, we got the 2018 NHL draft. This one's a bit underwhelming once you get past like the first 15 picks, headlined by guys like Dahlin, Kotkaniemi, Svechnikov, Brady Tkachuk as their first 4 picks. They also have like Quinn Hughes, Evan Bouchard, and Noah Dobson in the top 15. But like I said, once you get past that Noah Dobson pick, there's really no one that screams on paper who has become like a solid NHL top sixer. There's a guy here and there, but nothing really to write home about. I think when we're talking about drafts that aren't very deep, even a draft that doesn't have a complete first round, this is the perfect example of that. I think I'm going to put the 2018 draft in the not a deep draft class tier. I just feel like this one is very underwhelming when compared to a bunch of the other ones on this list, so I think that this is the perfect spot to place this group of guys. Next up, we got the 2017 NHL draft, and in my eyes, this is probably the more underwhelming draft on this list, even less than 2018, just because the first couple of picks, they're good players, but they weren't exactly the best. But once you get to about pick 3 through pick 10, that's where like this one's the best. Just looking at this list, the fact that Cale Makar and Miro Heiskanen didn't go first or even second overall is just so brutal to look back on, even Elias Pettersson. But yeah, you have some headline players. Nico Hischier is obviously a great center in this league. Miro Heiskanen, Cale Makar, Elias Pettersson. And then outside of that, there's just a couple of nice players like Owen Tippett was taken a little bit later, as well as I think there was another guy I wanted to mention here. I can't remember where he was taken, but if you guys have some other players from this draft that you think would maybe boost this one up. Oh, here it is. Stuart Skinner was taken 78th overall. So there was at least like one player in the later rounds that you could be like, oh, hey, he stood out. But outside of that, I think the top 10 is great, but similarly to 2018, there's just really not all that much outside of that. So if you were a team that was looking to get like a hidden gem, that just wasn't happening here. So I think when it comes to 2017, I think just like the 2018 draft, it had a great top 10, maybe even top 15, but once you got past that, there was just like no talent to be taken from this class. So I'm going to place it in the not a deep draft class tier. Maybe you guys can say I'm a little bit wrong with this prediction, but I think based on like the standards that I set, even though the top 15 was great, I do think that this draft class wasn't really that deep outside of that. Next up, we have the 2016 NHL draft. Some would argue that this is one of the deepest drafts of the past decade, but there is just one draft class that we all know just stood out from the rest. But looking at 2015, this was headlined by a ton of great players, including Austin Matthews, Patrick Laine, Clayton Keller, Matthew Tkachuk, Mikhail Sergachev, Charlie McAvoy, Tage Thompson. And then when you go into like the second round, you'll see some players like Jordan Kyrou in there. And even the third round, you'll see Joseph Woll. And don't forget that also Alex DeBrincat was taken in that second round too. So you can see there was some hidden gems, but also some great talent throughout that first round. I remember watching this draft, and this was back to back with 2015 and then 16, where I just couldn't get my eyes off of the TV. I just was glued to every single pick that was being made. And it's so nice to see a lot of these players develop into some really great franchise guys already. So just taking a look at this draft, even when you get deeper, you'll see some good talent like Connor Ingram coming out of this one too. So I think that this is the first draft that I can confidently say belongs in the elite top 10, had a great first round, but you also found some nice gems in the second and the third rounds as well. Next up, we have the 2015 NHL draft, easily one of the deepest draft classes in NHL history, not just the past decade, headlined by legendary players like Connor McDavid. And then as you keep going down, there's Jack Eichel, Mitch Marner, Noah Hanifin, Zach Werenski, Timo Meier, and Mikko Rantanen, all taken in the top 10. Then there's guys like Jake DeBrusk, Matt Barzal, Kyle Connor, Joel Eriksson Ek, Brock Besser, Travis Konechny, all taken in that first round. Then there's even a couple of other guys that were taken in the second and later rounds, like Sebastian Aho was taken in round 2, and then Kirill Kaprizov was taken in the later round. So you can see there was a ton of hidden gems and a bunch of names that I'm probably even leaving off this list that were huge impact players from this draft class. Easily one of the best draft classes I've seen in my lifetime, and I think a lot of people would argue that it's one of the best in league's history. So I'm placing it in the best tier. It's the best one when it comes to talent in the first round, and then depth throughout the first, second, third, and fourth rounds as well. Next up, we have the 2014 NHL draft, and I think this one's about on par with the 2016 draft because the first round is spectacular, and then there's some really nice players taken in the later rounds. Looking at the first round real quick, Aaron Ekblad, Reinhart, Draisaitl, Pastrnak, Nylander, some really amazing NHL players. Even guys taken later like Larkin were still in the first round that we didn't mention there. And then the second round, there's Thatcher Demko. Third round, Ilya Sorokin. And then a few other notable players will pop up, guys like Ville Husso that you're like, oh, nice. And then Devon Toews in the fourth round. Just some good players here and there in the later rounds, but the top round 2 is just spectacular. So like I mentioned with 2016, it has some nice depth, an elite top round. So I think this is the perfect draft class to put here. Really, when we're talking about like 2014, 15, and 16, those are some of the best draft classes of my lifetime. So it definitely shows you how the talent was there then and how we're still trying to see what's going to happen from these later draft classes. But all of these draft classes has really just proven to be spectacular about a decade later. Next up, we have the 2013 NHL draft. Now, this one's going to go in this third tier with the 2019 and 2021 draft. I feel like there's a few players outside of the first round that are notable. You have guys like Tyler Bertuzzi, UC Saros, and a few other guys that you're like, oh yeah, they're some nice players, and those are actually some hidden gems in this draft. But the real big time players from this one that stand out in the first round are like Nathan MacKinnon, Alexander Barkov, Seth Jones, Elias Lindholm, Sean Monahan, Bo Horvat, Valery Nichushkin, Max Domi, Josh Morrissey, and a few other names here. So it's a pretty good first round draft, actually an exceptional first round for this draft. But outside of that, you'll get a few nice players in the later rounds, and that's about it. So I think like 2021 and like 2019, you have to place it in this tier because there are some good players in the later rounds, but outside of the first round, it wasn't some exceptional one like 2014, 15, and 16. Next up, we got the 2012 NHL draft class, and this one to me is the most underwhelming on this list, so I'm going to put it in the not a deep draft class tier. I don't think there's a draft out there that is more underwhelming than this one, especially with how many busts were in the first round, like Nail Yakupov, Ryan Murray, Galchenyuk, who just haven't become real NHL superstars that you would expect to take with the first 3 picks. Now, a few players should have been taken higher. Philip Forsberg, Andrei Vasilevsky, those guys are great. There's some later gems like Matt Murray, who was very productive for the Pittsburgh Penguins, as well as a few other guys that you're like, yeah, I like those players, but nobody that stands out to you as a superstar or franchise guy really outside of a couple of players from the first round that were taken way lower than some of the other guys. So I'm going to place this one in the not a deep draft class tier. Even the first round wasn't all that exceptional outside of like 3 players, so I think this is the perfect tier for this one. Next up, the 2011 NHL draft. This one is a bit indifferent for me. I like some of the players, but there's really no true superstar, and there's basically no depth to this one at all outside of the first round. Headlined by like RNH, Gabriel Landeskog, Huberdeau, Zibanejad, Scheifele, Sean Couturier, Dougie Hamilton. It does have some good players. Even JT Miller was taken in the first round of this one. But seriously, once you get past that first round, we're talking about just a few guys here and there, like John Gibson was taken in the second round. William Karlsson was taken in the second round. The third round has practically no one, and same goes for the fourth. There's just nothing outside of the first, and then maybe 2 names in the second. So I think this one should go in the not a deep draft class as well, but I'll also place it in, no, actually I'm going to place it with 2020. It has a great top 10, but the depth for this one's trash. I actually really like the top 10 of this one. Even though there's no franchise guy, there are some really great players here that have definitely made an impact on their roster and have been super productive. So I think that's the perfect tier for this one. Belongs with 2020. It's a great top 10, but just has no depth in this. And last but not least, we have the 2010 NHL draft. Just like 2011, I think that this is the perfect tier to put it in with 2020 and 2011 because there's a great top 10, but it's not exactly like there's a superstar superstar here. Taylor Hall, Tyler Seguin, Ryan Johansson, Niederreiter, Connolly, Jeff Skinner, Granlund, Jack Campbell's in this, Cam Fowler, and a few other players that you're like, yeah, these guys are notable NHL guys that I respect a lot, but there is no franchise guy like we mentioned with like Connor McDavid, Austin Matthews. Even in the second and third rounds, you'll notice there's some nice players here. Jason Zucker taken in the second, and a few other guys maybe here and there in the third and fourth, but nothing that's like, hey, this is going to change my franchise or really impact it all that much. So I think this one belongs in the maybe not a deep draft class tier, actually, because even when I'm looking at the top 10, it's actually pretty underwhelming. A lot of these guys have basically amounted to second line guys. So I think it's definitely a step below 2011 and 2020. So that's where I'm going to put it. I'll put it in a not a deep draft class tier. But this is my NHL draft class tier list from 2010 to 2024. Let me know what you guys think about all of this. If you think one of these draft classes is overrated on my list or underrated, drop all of your thoughts in the comments below. As always, thank you guys for watching this video. Make sure you like this one and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I'll see you guys in the next one.